Silence is golden. Meditation matters. By Angelo. Chapter 4. Meditation as a Practice. Quote, "Find that place which is effortlessly at rest within itself. Be there. Be one with that." Close quote. That's by Muji. The chapters on conscious awareness and waving goodbye are intended to clearly set the scene for the introduction of meditation as a practice. Our daily mind-based experience of life is created by a low and individuated vibration of a single universal consciousness. There undoubtedly are higher vibrations of this consciousness. The lower vibrations are a condensing and constriction of the higher ones. Waves cannot appear unless there is an ocean of water through which energy can move. Each wave is an individuation of the ocean. Waves travel on the surface, but the ocean is below. Likewise, an individual mind cannot exist unless there is a movement of consciousness that creates the experience. Each mind is an individuation of consciousness. The mind is on the surface, but consciousness is below. If there is no ocean, then there are no waves. If there is no consciousness, then there are no minds. We know that we have a mind because we are consciously aware of it. The logical conclusion therefore is that the single consciousness sits below the level of mind and gives rise to it. The metaphorical ocean has depth, and the water is consistent throughout. The single consciousness also has depth, but the deeper we go, the higher the vibration becomes. The ultimate high vibrational state of consciousness at its source is infinite and eternal. As the vibration then decreases, the sense of infinity and eternity become increasingly restricted. By the time consciousness manifests as a low vibration individual mind, it has lost its sense of freedom and eternity and has become constricted and time-bound. This is the natural consequence of consciousness condensing itself into multiple individual minds in order to experience its own creation. The trade-off for this lower vibrational individuation of consciousness is the loss of silence, stillness, peace, love, bliss, eternity, infinity, and wholeness. It is not possible to experience the higher vibrational states of consciousness whilst remaining on the surface in a low vibrational state. This is the equivalent of a wave trying to experience itself as the entire ocean. What we can do is let go of the lower state and hence naturally sink more deeply into our core beingness and hence experience the higher states. This is the essence of meditation. We can use our metaphor to explain the process. If a wave were to meditate, then it would start off by meditating as a wave. It would turn its attention away from external sensory perception and focus instead on the internal experience. First of all, it would come to realize that its beingness as a wave was comprised of water. Gradually, the sense of identity would shift from being a wave to being water. After further practice, it would begin to observe that the water within the wave existence was not constant, but rather that it was energy moving through the water that created the sensation of a wave. There was no permanent water in the wave, but instead the wave was a movement across the surface of the ocean. The water in the wave from moment to moment was the ocean itself. The sense of identity would now shift again, this time from being water to being the entire ocean. The wave would wake up to its true identity as the ocean. It would begin to experience the qualities of being the whole ocean, rather than the limited experience of being just a wave. With repeated practice, the beingness would increasingly settle as the experience of being the ocean. The sensations of being a wave could still be witnessed, but such observation would be detached and make no real difference to the ocean. The ocean would simply abide as itself in a state of serene, eternal bliss. The wave is no longer meditating, but rather the ocean is just aware of its beingness. We can now bring this metaphorical explanation to bear on our own experience. When an individual body-mind person begins to meditate, we are, of course, meditating as a person. We are the ones undertaking the meditation practice. We turn our attention away from external sensory perception and internal mind activity, and focus instead on the deeper internal experience of being consciously aware. First of all, we come to realize that conscious awareness is prior to mind activity, and that therefore we must be this individual awareness. Gradually, the sense of identity shifts from being a body-mind person to being the experience of conscious awareness. After further practice, we would begin to observe that we are aware of being individually aware. We would see that individual awareness arises out of universal, non-individual conscious awareness. The individual awareness is a restricted version of consciousness itself. The sense of identity would now shift again, this time from being individual conscious awareness to being the wholeness of consciousness. We would wake up to our true identity as consciousness. We would begin to experience the qualities of being the whole of consciousness, rather than the limited experience of just being an individual person. With repeated practice, the beingness would increasingly settle as being consciousness. The sensations of being a body-mind person would still be witnessed, but such observation would be detached and make no real difference to consciousness in its entirety. Universal consciousness would simply abide as itself in a state of silence, stillness, peace, love, bliss, eternity, infinity, and wholeness. The person is no longer meditating, but rather consciousness is just being aware of its beingness. There is, however, a metaphorical snag, and it is one that can seem very difficult to overcome. The salt water in an ocean creates a natural buoyancy. A buoyant object will automatically rise back to the surface as soon as it gets the chance. It doesn't matter how deep down the object goes, it will always return to the surface once it is able. The solution is to secure the object below the surface until such time as it becomes sufficiently waterlogged and hence naturally part of the new environment. The pull to the surface will then have dissipated. This snag, of course, also applies to the practice of meditation. The apparently external world of sensory perception, and also the internal activity of mind, seem to have a sort of magnetic pull on our attention. Once our attention is back in the mind, then we somehow become hypnotized into being stuck in it and completely forget about the peaceful state of being consciously aware that we experience in meditation. This happens time and time again, and it can seem that we are never going to escape this constant return to the personal mind, even though we meditate on a regular basis. There is a lovely metaphor of an electric fan, which is helpful in this respect. When a fan is plugged in and running, then the blades of the fan rotate at speed. When the fan is unplugged, then the blades keep rotating for quite some time, but eventually come to rest. If we lose patience in waiting for the fan to stop, then we can inadvertently plug the fan back in and power up the rotation of the blades once again. The trick is to unplug the fan and leave it unplugged until it comes to rest. Then, in order to keep it at rest, we need to avoid the temptation to plug it back in. This simple understanding of the potential problem with meditation is very important to grasp. The practice is to unplug from mind activity and become consciously aware of awareness. The mind will continue to agitate in the form of sensory perceptions, thoughts, emotions and memories, but the discipline is to just let that happen without judgment. If we try to resist mind activity and force it to stop, then we are effectively plugging back in the power, which will then keep it going. Obviously, this is self-defeating and can lead to frustration and a feeling that meditation practice is not working. We can also tend to confine meditation to our allotted time slots and spend the rest of the day powering up the mind. This creates such a busy headspace that the mind never seems to calm down, even when we do meditate again. It would make more sense for us to have meditation techniques that we can deploy throughout the day, rather than at specific times. I will cover these various techniques in later chapters. The purpose of meditation is not to quieten the mind. The purpose is to withdraw attention from the mind and allow consciousness to expand into higher vibrations. The byproduct of this practice will eventually lead to a quieter mind, but this is not the goal. Indeed, it's very important to not have any expectation as to what may happen during any particular meditation session. Expectation is the mother of disappointment. The benefit comes over time through the regular practice of meditation. Let's not give up too early because we're disappointed with progress. We already are consciousness, so success is guaranteed, provided we keep up the practice. We cannot fail in meditation, but what we can often do is fail to meditate. The idea of practice does of course sound like hard work. There is a reluctance to commit to spending time in practice when there are so many other competing priorities. Such a concern may even prevent us from starting in the first place. I would like to reassure you by sharing my experience of learning to drive. I imagine that this is a common experience for most of us. I learned to drive when I was 17 years old. The whole process seemed very unnatural. Trying to engage the clutch and power at just the right balance to avoid stalling, stuttering or spinning the wheels. Hill starts in particular were very challenging and I thought I would never master them. Having to keep changing gears whilst concentrating on steering, having to keep checking the mirrors, having to indicate when turning, having to be continually aware of other road users, pedestrians, the direction of the road, the speed limit, and all manner of other priorities and distractions. And all of this before I ever learned the highway code or tried to parallel park. I failed my first driving test because I was so nervous and lacking in confidence. I eventually passed on the second attempt when I was 18. Today I jump in my car and drive without even thinking about it. Everything just seems to happen automatically. It is such a familiar experience that I'm permanently on autopilot and perform all of the tasks in a smooth and effortless way. There's no question of trying to remember to change gear, indicate or look in the mirrors. The driving experience is seamless and fully integrated. I cannot tell you when this transition from concentrated effort to natural effortlessness took place, but it was a long time ago. I cannot tell you when this transition from concentrated effort to natural effortlessness took place, but it was a long time ago. I've driven all sorts of different vehicles over the years and have never had a problem with any of them. Today, I take it for granted. The message in the driving story is very simple, yet extremely important. We put in the effort until it becomes effortless. This is true for all sorts of activities. For the subject in hand, we keep practicing meditation until meditation effectively practices itself. This outcome is inevitable, provided we put in the effort to begin with. There is one final generic aspect of meditation that I would like to share before we make a start in exploring the various potential techniques. We've previously mentioned 4 possible modes of consciousness, namely the activity of the mind, the individual conscious awareness, the awareness of awareness, and finally the awareness of being. By naming these states of consciousness, there is an understandable tendency to think that there are just 4 actual discrete stages. A more accurate and helpful understanding would be that consciousness exists on a continuous spectrum of vibration, from the lowest vibration right up to the highest, which is consciousness in its purest form. Any point on this spectrum could be conceptualized as a stage, but in truth it is just a continuous range of vibration. A good way to illustrate this point is to consider the various vibrations and manifestations of H2O. A low vibration or temperature of H2O appears as solid ice. The next apparent stage would be a higher vibration appearing as liquid water. Higher still, and H2O takes the appearance of gaseous steam. The highest vibration would be the subatomic components of hydrogen and oxygen. So we have a spectrum of the same underlying molecule appearing as a solid, a liquid, a gas, or completely invisible subatomic particles. But H2O can, of course, vibrate at any temperature. The 4 states that I've highlighted are just staging posts along the spectrum. There are an infinite number of possibilities. Some have names, but many do not. For example, slushy ice sits somewhere between ice and water, and boiling water sits somewhere between water and steam, and so on. The conceptual states only exist when we give them names, and hence think of them as things. H2O can move up and down the spectrum of temperature and can sit at any point in any moment. The state of H2O is never static and will continuously vary depending on its vibration. ice can become water and then become steam very quickly. Likewise, steam can condense into water and freeze into ice. There is no definitive state of H2O. All we can say is that it momentarily sits somewhere on a continuous spectrum of vibration and hence possibility. When we apply this illustration to the continuous spectrum of consciousness, then we can begin to grasp how vibration creates the experience of different states of being. These states are neither static nor definitive. It is a continually moving spectrum of vibration with an infinite number of states. We move from one experience of consciousness to another simply by changing the vibration. When we let go of lower states, the vibration naturally increases, and we then experience the states that are higher or deeper. If we name these deeper states or stages as places to reach, then they seem to take on a sense of potential permanence, but this is not really true. All we can say is that there is an accessible range of vibration of consciousness, and that our sense of being and identity will be somewhere on this spectrum in any given moment. It can be somewhere else in the next moment. There is no permanent, definitive state. We can't get somewhere and then stay there. What we can do, though, is practice meditation until the vibration of consciousness begins to settle in a higher part of the spectrum. The initial effort will gradually become effortless, and we will eventually run on autopilot. Our new state of being will become the new normal, and it will transform our experience of life. What we are seeking to do in meditation is to rise above or go beyond the usual limitations of the restricted, agitated personal mind. The word that is commonly used to capture this sense of rising above or going beyond is transcendence. It makes sense, therefore, to begin our examination of potential meditation techniques by looking into a practice that delivers the transcendence that we're looking for.